What's going on, everybody? I'm Matt Harmon. Welcome to the Yahoo Fantasy Forecast, and it is a hell of a day to talk ball. And join me to do just that. He is the man, the myth, the legend, the current human being leading the Fantasy Pros Rankings contest. It is our very own Justin Boone. Boone, what's going on, buddy?
We're not there yet. There's still a few weeks to go here. We're not celebrating anything yet, but I definitely had a great week after moving into first last week. I finished first overall for week 14, so extended the lead a little bit. And consistency is the name of the game, right? And I've been very fortunate here. The last 3 weeks, I've been inside the top 10 every week. The last 8 weeks, I've been inside the top 20 every week. So I wasn't lying earlier in the season when I said, like, as we get more data points, as we start to figure things out, that picture does become a little more clear. And all the projections in the rankings get better as we go. And now it's the most important time. So I better stay hot here. We better make sure that we're accurate down the stretch so that people can actually win some fantasy titles, which is the point of this whole thing.
That is the point of this whole thing. We're here for you out there. But I will say, Boone, I have never been invested in my own fantasy rankings. I am very invested in you succeeding this year. That's all I care about, really. So anything
I appreciate that.
Anything I can do to help, I'm here.
I've been getting a lot of messages from, friends, family, and from a lot of people at Yahoo too every week asking me for the update where I'm at. So yeah, no pressure at all here, guys. But yeah, 3 weeks to go. We were talking before the show, December 28th, 1 p.m. Eastern. I will click, enter it for the final time. That will be the end of the contest, week 17. And then we'll see where the cards fall.
Well, I'm very excited. I'm also very excited about this show today because we've got a big one here ahead of us. It's the fantasy football playoffs, man. The pressure is ratcheted up on all of us. I know I'm stressing out about a few lineup decisions, so hopefully I can find some clarity along the way, along with everybody else here watching and listening to the show. So as we always do, we'll have our 3 segments. The first 2 will be Boone's 6-pack of questions. Then we'll get into literally no one's games of the week, and we'll finish up with the hurry up offense, rapid fire questions to end the week 15 preview. But with that, let's get into it. Let's get into Boone's 6-pack of questions. All right, Boone, hit me. What is the first question here in week 15, the beginning of the fantasy football playoffs?
Well, this was kind of interesting, and I will admit that the producers kind of pushed this one a little bit. I thought it was a pretty cool question, though. We're both going to contribute to it here. Who are the bounce back league winners? Who are the guys who maybe haven't had the seasons that we expected them to, but all of a sudden now in the final 3 weeks, like I was saying before, when it matters the most, who's actually going to turn it around and become a meaningful fantasy asset and actually help people win some weeks and win a title? I have a couple here. I think you have a few you want to mention. I want to start with one that I think is like the poster boy for this, Harmon. And it's somebody that we have talked about a bunch. It's somebody that we've mentioned on the Coping Corner episodes who struggled this year.
Oh, baby.
In part, it was his fault, but also the circumstances around him weren't as good as they were the previous season when he was the offensive player of the year. I'm talking about Saquon Barkley, Harmon. And he was drafted as a top 5 fantasy back through 14 weeks, RB 15 in fantasy points per game. It has been a bumpy ride. There's been a couple good performances along the way, but overall, I think people feel pretty bad about taking him in the first round. And I say that from experience. And I mentioned before that there was a bunch of leagues where I was picking mid to even late first round. Saquon fell to me. I thought I was getting this incredible value. Turns out, I guess everybody else in my leagues knew what they were doing and they let him fall. But I've made it into the playoffs in most of those leagues. And now I think I'm going to reap the rewards here because we're looking at what he could potentially do down the stretch. He's coming off finally a good game, 122 yards and a score on 20 touches last Sunday. And we can go over all the things again, the play calling, some of the struggles and injuries in the offensive line. It hasn't been the same environment that it was last year, but the schedule gets very, very easy for him coming up. He gets the Raiders this week, then the Commanders and the Bills. That's the next 3 weeks for him. From his perspective, all 3 of those defenses rank inside the top 8, as everybody watching can see here. Inside the top 8 in most fantasy points allowed to running backs, depending on the scoring, right? It could be 9, 10, it could be whatever. But from my perspective, top 8. And we're also potentially going to get Lane Johnson back soon. I don't know if it's going to be this week, but it should be at some point here in the fantasy playoffs. I think we could see Saquon Barkley actually perform pretty well here during the final 3 weeks and be a meaningful factor in the fantasy playoffs, Harmon.
I love this take. It was just so refreshing to see Saquon Barkley rip off a 50-plus yard run last week against the Chargers on Monday night. Obviously, it came off a kind of a fake tush-push sort of situation there, but that's fine. We'll take it, right? We'll take a long run in that situation. Sure. Man, I had one Saquon Barkley team. That was it. It only took him one time. It was my guillotine team that got eliminated last week. So I can't reap the benefits of it, but I was certainly starting to think ahead to this schedule here. So I love this call by you. I think this is a really good one. He's going to be the classic, like, congratulations to all the consolation bracket bros. Like, you won your league with Saquon Barkley. But as you just showed us, you can make the fantasy football playoffs with Saquon Barkley, and you can reap those rewards. I'll offer up one here as well. I'll go to the wide receiver position, and I think Jaden Reed could be one of these guys. And I just can't help myself. I've got to talk about Jaden Reed. But this Packers offense is really cooking right now. Christian Watson, I know we're going to talk about him a little bit later in the show. He's got a tough matchup this week, but Christian Watson being back and being, in my opinion, playing better than we've ever seen him play at the NFL level before, which is outrageous considering he came off that torn ACL from January of this year. He's playing great. I think the offensive line is playing a little bit better than it was at the start of the year. Jordan Love is on fire right now. Josh Jacobs' injury is something to monitor, but still, even when Jacobs has been out, they've been able to cobble together a good running game with Emmanuel Wilson. Not too concerned about that. I just think this is an offense to invest in. And last week's Jaden Reed obviously didn't come back to a full-time role. We'll see like what his route participation is this week, but he did come back and clearly run as the number one slot receiver. Denver gives up a lot of production to slot receivers. They're 5th in air yards allowed to slot receivers. He had 3 catches on 3 targets against man coverage last week against the Chicago Bears. And obviously the Broncos are very man coverage heavy. So I think he's a good, kind of what the heck flex, high ceiling type player. And then down the stretch, like, we've got a matchup with the Bears again, the Ravens then in week 17. So I think Jaden Reed is a guy, he's shown spike week potential. I don't see any reason why he can't have a few of these spike weeks down the stretch after mostly hanging out in your IR spot all year long.
Yeah, I mean, there was a reason we were talking about him as a pickup on the waiver wire shows when we thought he was going to come back from injury the last few weeks, right? And that's because we've seen the ceiling from him before. We've seen this guy produce as a top 12 fantasy receiver for fairly long stretches. They weren't like a whole season, but he's done it before, going back to his rookie year when he scored a bunch of touchdowns. Yeah, he can do this. He can get hot. And it certainly was great to see him come back and produce right away, right? Not get lost in the mix in that receiver room that's like, 5 deep or so right now. When you take a receiver in the first round and he's basically like the 5th receiver on your depth chart, that's saying something. But Reed coming back, getting right into the mix and producing, and let's hope there's some bigger games in his future here. I really like that one. My next one here, this is no surprise. I've brought his name up a bunch of times on all of our shows. I've written him up in articles this year. Brock Purdy. And I might be cheating here a little bit because I think the injury this year is really the reason why he didn't produce this season, but he comes back and he's had a couple down games. Let's face it, before the bye week in week 14, he had a couple bad performances, but those were against defenses that were inside the top 7 for fewest fantasy points allowed. Then he goes on bye. Now he's coming back. And the schedule is just cake the rest of the way. He gets the Titans this week. They're the 6th best matchup for fantasy QBs. The numbers might be a little bit different again here, depending on your scoring settings, where we were pulling them from. Then the Colts in week 16. Jadarius Ward just went on IR. Sauce Gardner, we're not sure if he's going to be back in time for that game. So they got some injuries that they've been dealing with. That makes that matchup a little bit easier potentially. And then they finish off the season with the Bears, who are inside the top 10 for most fantasy points allowed here. So Brock Purdy has done it the last 2 seasons in fantasy points per game. He's been a QB1. He's been a top 12 quarterback. I think he's going to be able to do that again. Not only is he going to be a QB1, but he has that upside in this system with the weapons around him. We'll talk about some of the other 49ers players a little later in the show here, but I really think that the 49ers are set up to just crush here with this schedule down the stretch. And I think people are sleeping on them in part because of the struggles they've had this year with some injuries, and in part because they had their bye right before the fantasy playoffs and a couple down games right before it. And they're going to come back to these great matchups and they're going to crush.
I agree with this one too, and even to the point that one of the guys I included here, I know we've talked about him as a full panic player, a coping corner player, but could Ricky Pearsall be one of these guys down the stretch too? I mean, the production could not be worse in these 3 games before the bye, right? I mean, if you just look at 49ers top pass catchers, it's 212 yards to George Kittle, 134 to Juwan Jennings, 114 to Christian McCaffrey, 20 receiving yards for Ricky Pearsall in 3 games before the bye. But he's a full-time player. He's out there, right? 89% route participation. He's mostly running those deeper routes. He doesn't really have the role, honestly, that I thought he would have really throughout the course of the season, but especially these last 3 games. I expected him to be more of a guy who got some more layup targets, running routes from the slot. He's mostly just been an outside down the field player. And so if that continues, he's going to be very boom or bust. But like Boone, you read off some of those matchups, man. They're really good for wide receivers too. Specifically, if Pearsall's the downfield guy, this Titans matchup, I mean, you would have to have some, he'd have to have some onions to be starting Ricky Pearsall in fantasy football this week after freaking 20 yards in 3 games before the bye week. But the Titans are the most vulnerable defense in the NFL to downfield passes in particular, and Pearsall is the downfield guy here. So, like I said, I think we can kind of group these ones together because if Purdy's going to have that finish, of course it's going to be a lot of George Kittle. Juwan Jennings can be solid. Christian McCaffrey's doing his thing. But Ricky Pearsall in some way, like if he's going to access that ceiling, he's going to have to come along for the ride here because he is the downfield player. 89 air yards in the last 3 games before the bye. That's not a ton, but still he is getting those downfield looks in this offense right now.
Yeah, it's one of those situations, you kind of outlined it there, where if he got dropped, and I will admit I did drop him in a league or 2, go pick him up, hold him through this game, see how he does, and then you could consider potentially playing him. I don't think it's a situation where you're going to put him in your lineup this week unless you absolutely are desperate and have to. But still, he is set up to potentially come back around, and it'll be an interesting bookend to the season if he's able to have that great start to the year, basically give us nothing due to injury and ineffectiveness in the middle of the season, and then come back around down the stretch here and get it done. That would be pretty cool for him. I really want to see it because it's a player that we both really liked and who we talked up before the year and who we think is going to have a good career. And you just wonder if he didn't get hurt this season, how would things have gone? And there's a lot of players that we could do that with, right? I'm going to bring up a running back, and it's, a guy who is getting an opportunity because of an injury. He lost his job early in the season to Cam Scatteraboo. Then Cam Scatteraboo goes out for the season. Tyron Tracy Jr. takes over. And the good news on this one right off the top is that we thought before the bye in week 13, he got dinged up. He left early. He said he didn't think it was a big deal. We know players sometimes are a little, a little too positive when it comes to their injury situations, but back to full practices this week. He is fine. He is going to be out there. So there's no worries about the injury whatsoever. And you look at what he was doing before that game where he got hurt and had to leave early. His playing time had increased. He had played a season high 71% of the snaps in week 12. And he had been pretty good in the weeks before that. He didn't have any touchdowns, but 71 scrimmage yards in week 10, 137 yards in week 11, and 130 yards in week 12. He's heavily involved as a pass catcher. Just needs to add some touchdowns to the mix. That would really help here. Fortunately for him, he gets the Commanders this week. They're giving up the 5th most fantasy points to running backs. He gets the Raiders in the fantasy championship. They're the 8th most generous to RBs. Those games are sandwiched around a Vikings game, which on paper, Minnesota, not the friendliest defense, even for running backs, but we've seen guys get there against them, even in the last month, right? Emmanuel Wilson, 125 yards and 2 scores against Minnesota. DeAndre Swift, 90 yards. Kyle Monangai, Zach Charbonnet, they found the end zone. So it's not impossible for running backs to have decent days against them. And again, that was just in the last 4 weeks, all those results there. So Tracy, a great role in an offense that's going to get at least 2 quality matchups here in the fantasy playoffs. And even if they fall behind, he can get there as a pass catcher. He can get involved that way. I could see him really getting hot and finishing strong as a fantasy RB2 who has that RB1 upside. And even in those games where he's putting up the big yardage totals, Devin Singletary was still putting up okay yards as well. So both these guys can produce together. It's not necessarily a one or the other kind of scenario. I think if we're going like a little bit deeper with these names, I think that Tracy Jr. is somebody that could sneak up onto the radar and really produce.
That's a deep one, but it does make sense because the Giants have really leaned into the run since Mike Kafka has taken over, to the point I've joked that are they just trying to run out the clock on the season here, just make sure Jackson Dart doesn't get hurt and gets to next year. Like, that's the main priority. But again, they're leaning into, like, their pass rate over expected, I think, is dead last since Kafka has taken over here. So there should be a lot of opportunity for Tracy, who I still think is a pretty quality back. This week 15 matchup against the Commanders is really nice, as is week 17 against the Las Vegas Raiders. I'll finish us up here with a running back as well. I'll say Chuba Hubbard from the Carolina Panthers. Kind of a chalky answer at this point because we've seen him rise up in importance here, but I just think this Panthers team coming off the bye, Chuba Hubbard going to be even healthier. I think they obviously need these next few games to compete with Tampa Bay in the division. We're recording this before Thursday Night Football, so we don't know the result of that game. But Tampa Bay losing last week only increases the odds that Carolina can win these games, especially week 16 when they play the Bucs. That one's going to be important. But week 15 against the Saints, I think he's a running back too in this one. Talked about this earlier in the week with Ray Garvin about the zone rushing success this team has when Chuba Hubbard is healthy and how the Saints have been vulnerable to that type of run in particular. Week 16 against the Bucs, I mean, they're obviously a tougher run defense, but you can move the ball on this unit, so they should be in scoring position. The one that kind of stinks is the week 17 matchup against the Seahawks, but because Chuba is the passing down back, and I would expect this team to be trailing against Seattle throughout the course of the proceedings, he should be able to pick up some cheapy receptions there. We've even seen, like, when this team gets into pure garbage time mode, Hubbard is just out there as the team drops back a ton. Obviously, this sounds crazy to say now, but all the way back in week 2 when this team played the Arizona Cardinals and they got kind of obliterated by the Cardinals and they pushed it back into a close game in the fourth quarter, Hubbard is just out there picking up a lot of cheapy receptions. So I think Hubbard in that sort of role could be even passable here in week 17. So a little bit of a stretch. He doesn't line up schedule-wise with some of the other guys that we've talked about, but he does at least have to make some sense there.
And another one where it's a long fantasy season, right? To start the year as the lead back there, to essentially lose his job after an injury and some ineffectiveness after that, and now potentially moving back into a 50-50 split or possibly even taking back the lead back job down the stretch here. I'm curious to see what this looks like because they're coming off a bye too, right? So let's see what this looks like with Rico Dowdle healthy now, presumably, and what these two guys can do, because it's another backfield where both of them can produce. It's certainly possible that both these guys could put up decent fantasy stats and be in fantasy lineups over the last few weeks here. So that's an interesting one that we're going to have our eye on this week.
Yeah, and just real quick, I would throw out Jameson Williams. This one's already kind of started to happen, so it's not really that interesting.
I don't know if we're going to allow that one. That's not really a bounce back one. I think he's been getting it done. I don't think he's going to be a he's going to be a first and second half split type player. I just thought it was funny, like looking it up this week. I really forgot because I've been kind of thinking like, oh yeah, he's really bounced back since Dan Campbell took over the play calling. I forgot that Sam Laporta got hurt in the middle of that week 10 game when Dan Campbell took the play calling back. So it's just kind of funny to think like, what actually was the case of Jameson Williams bouncing back? Was it Dan Campbell took over the play calling, or was it just, the other guy that gets a lot of targets in that offense got hurt? And that's kind of what we see happen in some of these wide receiver rooms. So just thought that was like interesting when studying that this week. But yeah, for the most part, we know that Jameson Williams is already kind of having that season. So let's move off this one. Let's get to your second question of the week here. Is Marcus Mariota? Are we saying Mariota or are we going with Marcus Mariota? I don't know if we're changing it like some people are, but is he the streaming?
No, I'm going to need some more time.
We're going to stick with Marcus Mariota. It seems so weird to say it the other way. Is he the streaming savior that people need this week? And this goes back to, we were talking on Monday about how bad the options were at quarterback, and there were going to be some managers out there that lost Daniel Jones and didn't know what to do and who could they pick up. And we went over just some of the brutal names that were out there in a lot of leagues, like JJ McCarthy and CJ Stroud, players that you don't really want to have in your lineup during the fantasy playoffs. And I don't know that you really feel great about having Marcus Mariota in your lineup in the fantasy playoffs either, but now we found out that unfortunately Jaden Daniels not going to be cleared this week. It's going to be Mariota out there for the start in this game. And I mean, based on their current record, based on how things have gone with this team, I don't know if there's much reason to bring Daniels back at all this year. So it's a scenario where maybe you'll have Mariota as your starter for a few weeks, not just this one. And I do feel bad for Commanders fans because it just kind of feels like, the Robert Griffin III storyline all over again here, which
don't even say
no one would want. I know nobody wants to see that happen. And I don't think so. I think Daniels either will come back, by the end of this season or bounce back next year and be fine. But right now we're looking at who's going to be under center, and it's going to be Mariota. And he is the best waiver wire quarterback here. We didn't think, because the way it went after the last game where they talked like Daniels could have come back in, and I assumed that he was going to be fine this week. That's not the case. So Mariota, you look at what he's done. He's been a really solid streamer, right? In the games that he's played here, he's finished as a top 13 fantasy QB in 4 of the 6 outings when he's played the majority of Washington snaps. That's great production. And if you're looking for that Daniel Jones replacement, I don't know that you're doing any better than that, right? And the key here is he offers a pretty high floor as well, just because he can give you those rushing stats. He can also have some ceiling games, which he's done in this offense. And the Commanders now are taking on this Giants defense. They're going to up the second most fantasy points to quarterbacks. So I had a friend message me yesterday and asked me this exact scenario. This is why I thought of this question. Asked me, who should I pick up to replace Daniel Jones? And mentioned all the same names, right? JJ McCarthy and Stroud and all these guys. And he sent me a picture of his waiver wire, and I immediately saw Mariota and said, go pick up Mariota. That's your guy. That's the player you slot in. This game has a pretty good point projection as well, 47.5. That's not too bad. It's not the highest one of the week, but that's not too bad for two teams like this, especially given some of the weather concerns around the league, which I'm sure will pop up in conversation periodically throughout this show. So it should be cold for this game as well, but I don't think that'll stop Mariota from producing. And really, I mean, it's like a desperate times call for desperate measures, right? If you had Daniel Jones, if you lost him, if you're looking for that guy to step in, it doesn't feel great, but I do think that Marcus Mariota could be that answer for you this week.
Marcus Mariota, when Terry McLaurin is on the field, 91.4 passer rating, 3 touchdowns, 1 interception. When Terry McLaurin is not on the field this year, 81.8 passer rating, 6 touchdowns, 6 interceptions. So obviously some of that stuff is noisy, whatever. But I do think that the way that Marcus has developed into some of these guys, like when they play long enough in the league, it feels like they just let their hair down a little bit. I thought Mariota always had a lot of talent, but he was a little bit of a conservative passer early on in his career. Now almost sometimes he borders on reckless with how he plays, and when you don't have McLaurin out there, you don't have anybody to really push the football to, Deebo Samuel, these other guys, like that's not really the type of receivers they have. So it does kind of make sense that this new aggressive version of Mariota, who runs the Cliff Kingsbury, kind of underneath stuff pretty well, but does want to push this football down the field. Having McLaurin out there makes a huge difference for this team in general, especially in a matchup like this week, Boone, where this Giants team, it's the exact type of team that McLaurin just absolutely cooks against, where they play a lot of man coverage, they play a lot of single high. McLaurin's one of the more, especially last season, was one of the more efficient receivers going against single high. So I think Terry's a fantasy starter in this matchup, and I certainly think that with Terry out there in this type of matchup, that obviously trickles down to Marcus Mariota. So I like this call a lot. I think he's definitely on the streaming radar this week.
I'm keeping a close eye on the backfield for Washington as well. I mentioned Chris Rodriguez Jr. as a guy to pick up the last couple of weeks for this matchup specifically, because the Giants are giving up the second most fantasy points to running backs. And yet he starts off the week by missing practice with a groin injury, gets back out there limited today. So it seems like he's trending in the right direction here. If he plays, he's that RB3 with RB2 upside. I definitely think that he's somebody that you could slot into your lineup in this one. If he doesn't play this week, I would actually look at JCM. I think Ja'Cory Krosky-Merritt, if Rodriguez isn't out there, because the matchup is so good,
could you imagine,
he would slot into that same range. I know it's another one of these crazy storylines where we have to pay attention the whole way through. We have to adapt as things change and injuries occur. But yeah, whoever is starting for the Commanders this week is going to be potentially a top 30 back, and a top 30 back with some upside because this matchup is so good. I mean, you look at the last 5 games here for the Giants, they've allowed 8 touchdowns to running backs. They've allowed some good yardage totals. 4 of the 5 starters that they faced went over 85 scrimmage yards. And in the 5th game that didn't, if you take Josh Jacobs and Emmanuel Wilson, they combined for over 85. So there's a lot of production that could be on the table here for this Washington backfield. And like I said, if it's Rodriguez starting, he has been the guy lately, so it would be him.
All right, let's put a pin in the Giant side of this one, because spoiler alert, we might be talking. I mean, this is clearly a game we're talking about in a different section here coming up. So we'll talk Giants when we get to that. But I like that breakdown of the Commanders' offense, specifically this running back. That would be hilarious if JCM ends up being one of these guys that didn't matter at all after being such an offseason hype bunny and has a random blow-up game in the playoffs. That would be absolutely hilarious. Let's get to your third question of the week about some of these divisional games.
Yeah, we could just kind of quickly give our thoughts on these. I want to know which key divisional matchup is going to produce the most fantasy points and the most fantasy fireworks this week. And I've talked before how I like to start players down the stretch who are actually playing for something in real life, teams that are in the playoff hunt. I think those players have a little extra motivation. If they end up with those injuries, they might push through it. They might fight a little harder, that sort of thing. And this week we have 3 big games, right? We have Bills at Patriots, Ravens at Bengals, and Chargers at Chiefs. Bills at Patriots, 49.5 projected point total in that one. Josh Allen, we're starting no matter what. Patriots have actually kept James Cook in check in most of their meetings against him. He had 100-yard game last year, but earlier this season, they held him under 50 yards. And not shocking, since New England's the second best opponent when it comes to fantasy running backs. They've been holding guys in check all year long. So Cook, a little bit riskier, but you're not sitting him. You're still starting him as a mid-range RB1 this week. The only other guy for Buffalo that I would feel comfortable starting would be Dalton Kincaid. Like, you're not touching these receivers. Yeah. Even Khalil Shakir, right? Like, Khalil Shakir has not had success against the Patriots. Kincaid comes back last week. I know he didn't play a full complement of snaps. I know even when he's healthy, he's not playing as many snaps as we would like. And yet he still continued to be efficient. He still continued to produce for fantasy. It helps when you first came back from injuries against the Bengals, who just let everybody go wild when it comes to tight ends. But really on that side, that's all you're looking at. And then for the Patriots, Drake May, even in a tough matchup, he's going to come through. He's going to be a guy that you're going to start. You're not going to put him on your bench. Trayvon Henderson, an upside RB2. Ramondre, an RB3. And we'll talk more about this backfield a little bit later. And those guys are going to get to work against Buffalo's run defense, which, let's face it, has not been great this year. And then the receivers, this is really interesting, right? It's kind of like dealer's choice here. Like Stephon Diggs, he's obviously going to be motivated. It's another revenge game for him here. We saw what he did in that first one. But the Bills secondary, a little healthier. This is a much tougher matchup this time around for him. And he's only topped 50 yards once in the last 6 games here. So he is a pretty risky wide receiver 3. Kayshon Boutte, then he falls down to wide receiver 4 flex range. I'm fine if you want to play Hunter Henry, but he's in that big group of low end tight end 1s, high end tight end 2s. He has not had a lot of success against Buffalo. They are the number 1 team against fantasy tight ends as well. So not necessarily the best matchup for him in this one. That's the game that I'm looking at, the one that I think could really blow up. Do you have a different feel of these games? Do you have another one that you like better?
Yeah, that Bills Patriots one is just so hard to read, and I really don't know how many high-end fantasy starters are. I could see that one being kind of a low-scoring game, honestly, just because I do think that Bills pass defense is turning things around. But we'll definitely talk that running back room later when we get to the second segment here. Ravens Bengals is interesting to me because I think Chargers and Chiefs is going to be another kind of low scoring one just because some of the chaos on both sides of the ball there. So Ravens and Bengals, I mean, on the Bengals side of things, we know for the most part it's going to be, we'll see if T. Higgins plays. He did run up the hill at practice today. I don't know if you guys track him.
He has been practicing.
Run up the hill. He has been practicing. So we'll see if we get T. Higgins this week, which is kind of wild considering the last couple of weeks he's had in the concussion protocol, but we'll see if we get him. If not, it's going to be Jamar Chase just getting peppered with footballs, and Mike Gesicki potentially as a sleeper if we don't get T. Higgins, like a deep sleeper at tight end. Talked about that a little bit with Nate yesterday. And then on the Ravens side of things here, Boone, can we get excited about Isaiah Likely as a sleeper off the waiver wire? He's had obviously with some caveats and asterisks, he's had 2 strong games back to back from a usage standpoint. We could certainly say that, and a little bit from a result standpoint, other than, in the end zone. And obviously this is a Bengals team that just bleeds production to tight end. So Likely, I think, is a nice deep sleeper. I am a little worried about Zay Flowers in this one after he kind of got dusted in the last game.
Yeah, negative fantasy points the last time that they played. So I don't feel great about him in this one. Certainly Isaiah Likely. I mean, we saw with the Bills last week, there were 3 tight ends for the Bills that ended up producing for fantasy. So maybe you want to start Charlie Kolar as well for the Ravens this week. Maybe he'll find the end zone in this one. Because, you want to start everybody, every tight end that's going against the Bengals, you want to put in your lineup. Obviously, I'm joking. Don't start Charlie Kolar unless you're in an insanely deep league. But Likely, we talked about him for a reason on the waiver wire show, right? That he's had these good games recently, and this matchup is the best possible matchup. The Bengals are allowing 7 more fantasy points per game to tight ends this year than any other team. The second place team is the Commanders, and they are 7 full points behind them per game. It's incredible how bad that they've been against tight ends. So I really like that one. And I didn't want to mention the Ravens too much because I felt like we talked about Lamar so much recently and went over him. But this is another interesting game for sure. And then I agree with you on that Chargers-Chiefs game. I think that one could be a little sloppier based on where those teams are and the defensive matchup. And that Chargers defense is quite strong. We saw that last week. They're a pretty bad matchup across the board for the Chiefs. So that's one where I don't feel like we're going to get the same kind of scoring potentially in that game. And obviously Vegas agrees with us because the projected point total for that one's down at 42.5, where the Bills, I mentioned 49.5, and then that Ravens game 51.5.
All right, we are going to take our first quick break. When we come back, we're continuing to roll through questions heading into week 15. We'll get into that right after this. All right, we're back. We're continuing to preview week 15. Boone, I'm very excited about this next question, so let's get into it.
Well, I want to say first, we got a ton of questions this week from the listeners. I've been putting out the last few weeks to call for questions. This week, by far the most, and probably because the fantasy playoffs are starting and people are just a little more under pressure now to make some of their decisions. But thank you to everybody out there who sent in questions. I think we got 3 good ones to talk over here. The first one is from Chase Aguiar. Do we start Omarion Hampton this week after it looks like a split against KC? Him or Kyle Monangai? Now, I have taken this. We're going to answer this question. I mean, right off the bat, we can answer this question, but I've taken this and kind of expanded it. I want to talk a little more about the rookie running backs as a whole this week and kind of how I'm ranking them. So first off, it's Hampton in my mind if we're just picking between Hampton and Monangai. And yes, it was not ideal that he came back into the split last week, but I think you could say that that's fine. They had him on some sort of pitch count. He still got through for fantasy. He looked good in that game. And presumably he'll just continue to get more work. He is the lead back there. So Vidal might be a thorn in his side going forward, but I think we're going to see Hampton just get more and more work here and take over that backfield. So if we're picking between those two guys, he is the one that I'm going with there. Now, as for the rookie running backs as a whole, these rankings are as of Thursday afternoon, so I have to mention that because they're going to change. I will admit they are going to change over the next few days. I'm going to continue to do research and work on them. But I'll try to talk through some of the spots where I think they actually might change over the next couple of days, because some of them I can, kind of potentially see with injuries and stuff. But right now I have them ranked, as people can see on the screen there. Travion Henderson at RB15, Quinshon Judkins at RB16, Ashton Genty at RB17. You might be sensing a pattern here. They're very close together, a bunch of them. RJ Harvey at RB18, Hampton at RB25, as I mentioned, and that's a little bit lower than you would hope, but that's because of the split. Woody Marks at RB26, and he's one that I definitely think can move up because Nick Chubb did not practice again today. So when I do my next update, Woody Marks certainly could be inside the top 20. He could jump quite a bit here. Devin Neal at RB27, and then Monungai at RB31. And I will just mention again, keep an eye on that Chris Rodriguez practice participation, because if he is not out there this week, Ja'Cory Krosky-Merritt would be in that same range as potentially a top 30 guy at running back. So is there anybody in there specifically that you want to discuss, Harmon? I can go through them all if you want, but is there anybody that you want me to highlight specifically?
I actually kind of want to drill in on the Hampton thing, because I think people might be overthinking the fact that he was in a split last week. Like, yeah, Kamani Vidal was involved. He led the team in snaps. That's because he's in there to pass protect, especially after Hampton got Justin Herbert lit up once.
Yeah.
And look, they couldn't afford for Justin Herbert to get lit up any more than he absolutely has to, because he's going to get lit up no matter what behind that offensive line, and he's dealing with the broken left hand. So, that obviously was, I think, it's something that got Hampton put on the bench a little bit there from the pass protecting standpoint. But look, the reality is, like, it was a 15-15 touch split. Hampton got more what I would say like priority usage in the passing game. He ran 8 routes, 2 targets. Kamani Vidal ran 24 routes, 3 targets. Obviously, he made the one big play, but Hampton got the work inside the 5-yard line. I just could see this being like, okay, yeah, this next week, Hampton plays more snaps than Vidal, who's still going to mix in a little bit, and it just really doesn't matter that much. It's not as if it's the greatest spot in the world, and obviously working behind that offensive line is not super ideal. But regardless, I think Hampton, I don't like really quibble with your order all that much, but I just think people might be overthinking the Hampton stuff at this stage.
Do you have him higher? Do you move him up into more like the low end RB2 range then?
Yeah, people are starting to get on me that I hate Ashton Genty. I don't hate Ashton Genty. I just hate the Raiders, and honestly, quite frankly, I hate what they've done to him. So that's maybe why I keep lashing out at this. But I actually think I could make a case that both RJ Harvey and Amarian Hampton are in better spots than Ashton Genty this week. But Hampton Genty is pretty close. Like I would have them back to back probably. But Harvey actually is the one that I think deserves to be a little bit higher on the list.
To be honest, like all 4 of those guys that I have above Hampton, they kind of all have some warts. Like the Henderson thing is we just don't know how much Ramondre Stevenson's going to be involved, right? And we saw last time out, he was pretty heavily involved. And on this show, before Stevenson came back, I made the comment that I would like pull my hair out if he somehow was the quote unquote lead back and getting more touches than Henderson. And we kind of saw something like that happen. Like, I don't understand it, but I know. Like, go back to the preseason. I had mentioned this stat, but you think back to Jahmyr Gibbs' rookie year, he shared his backfield. He only played about 56% of the Lions snaps that year. He finished as the RB11 in fantasy points per game, right? It's not like this type of back who can be explosive, who can have these big plays. It's not like they can't get there for fantasy, even if they are in like a 50-50 split, essentially. And that's basically what Henderson seems like he's in right now. And this matchup, of course, with the Bills, it's just a great opponent. The Bills are letting everybody run on them. They've been maybe a little bit better recently against the run, but overall, I think you can run on the Bills
Yeah.
like crazy. They're allowing the 5th most rushing yards on the year. They're allowing the most rushing touchdowns on the year. So I think Henderson is going to have a good game there, even though there's some kind of question marks around him. Judkins is in an interesting spot because the matchup isn't that scary. The Bears have been giving up some pretty decent games to running backs lately. The weather's also going to be cold, so maybe they lean on the run even more than they already do. But the Bears are 7.5-point favorites. I think Judkins just might get left in the dust a little bit. He has been involved in the passing game. He's been getting some targets, but he's not necessarily completely that guy that's going to get 6-7 catches or something that's going to keep him in the mix if they fall way behind. But that one's another one we're going to watch the weather, because I think that could impact the outlook. Sorry, what was that?
No, I said Dylan Sampson got in the mix for like 5 catches and like 60-something yards last week for the Browns as well. So that doesn't help Judkins' outlook.
For sure. And then that brings us to Genty, where he's coming off one of his worst games of the season. And yes, the matchup was tough, but the offense is just so bad. Like you're saying, they might start Kenny Pickett this week. If he starts, this is not going to be one of those like revenge spots. Like, oh man, Kenny Pickett's going to come through with the big day. It's going to be even worse. And right now, Vegas, massive underdogs. The game only has a 38.5 projected point total. The Raiders' implied point total, Harmon, is 13.5 this week. That is like as low as you will ever see. So it's hard to have a lot of confidence in Genty. Like, again, you hope that he could get like 6-7 catches or something to get him through. But in a matchup last week, we saw him really just get, totally bottled up. So not great for him. And then Harvey's this one where I think you and I talked about this on Fantasy Football Live on Sunday. This is one where I'm kind of worried because the last 2 weeks, it might seem insane for me to preach any sort of caution about Harvey, but the last 2 weeks, top 5 fantasy back, he's been great, right? Like he's come through for fantasy. And yet the matchups now are going to get way, way harder for him here. And we saw in a tougher spot that first start that he had. It was against the Chiefs. He only had 50 scrimmage yards. He didn't find the end zone in that game. And then last week against the Commanders, which was like a great setup for him, 62 yards. 2 weeks ago, 62 yards. And that was an overtime game, but he saved it with the touchdowns. And then, of course, last week, the Raiders game, he looked great. That was the best he's looked so far. But now the degree of difficulty is going to get a lot harder for him. The Packers defense inside the top 10 for fewest fantasy points allowed to RBs. So I'm just preaching, like, it's not like you're going to bench him necessarily, but I'm just preaching a little bit of caution. I think he belongs down in this range, more of like a mid to low end RB2. I don't know that you're going to see another RB1 performance from him because the schedule gets much tougher these next couple weeks.
It's funny. I pretty much completely agreed. And this, you might end up being right about this. I completely agreed with your stance on Harvey, everything you just outlined there prior to last week. And I even remember both of us saying, like, he's going to be good against the Raiders. Don't worry about it this week. This is a next, few games after that take.
Yeah,
I do think that he answered a few questions for me in that game. And I get it. The Raiders are the Raiders. But like from an efficiency perspective, whether it's yards after contact or rush yards over expected, he definitely took a step forward in that game. And I think just watching him, he felt a little bit more decisive. He's hitting holes. He's not trying to take everything to the corner store. He's really being a little bit more of a true running back. And he's a developmental guy. He hasn't been a running back forever. He was a collegiate quarterback at one point. So like, this is a guy that I think is getting better. So I kind of want to bet on him just to be a little bit too big to fail because he's the lead back, goal line work, pass catching, all that stuff. But you're 100% right. There's no question he is in a tougher spot this week than he was previously. So it's just interesting how all these guys, I kind of wanted to have this conversation too, because I had a buddy texting me and he seemed to have like all of these second-year or rookie running backs on his roster. So I was like, man, it is tough to pick between these guys this week because none of them is truly in a matchup or in a workload situation where it's just like, yes, green light. And yet I do think they're all fantasy starters this week, with the exception of, Manungai, Devin Neal, Woody Marks. Those are kind of deeper names.
Yeah, Woody Marks, though, is the one of those deeper names that I think could pop up, like I said earlier. If Nick Chubb isn't practicing, then you look at it's going to be like Dario Gunbowale as the number 2 back there. So we could see Woody Marks hasn't really had like the huge performances. He's gotten a decent amount of volume. This could potentially be a week where if he's out there, if he's healthy, and if Chubb isn't, he would vault up a little bit in these rankings and be a guy that I might be excited to play, actually, where right now where I have him ranked, you're not the most excited. It's more just like somebody you're putting in there because you need that spot covered up.
No, totally. I do feel almost bad for Woody Marks. It's like handling way too many touches for a guy in his frame and his size. You almost just feel bad for him, but it's good for us in fantasy. I have one Woody Marks dynasty team, and I need him out there getting 25 touches. So, ice up, buddy. We got to have you touch that ball a lot this week for my sake. So that's what really matters here. Okay, let's get to your next question. We're going to kind of stay on this same theme here.
All right, longtime follower. I think he sent in a lot of questions over the years at Joe_Saviano. Boone, I have a few RBs sharing the backfield that I need to decide on for this playoff week. I need to start 2, but can also use another one in the flex also. PPR league, I have the latter RBs here. Etienne, Tootin, Aaron Jones and Mason, Swift and Monangai, Jalen Warren and Gainwell, and Vidal and Hampton. Thanks. So that's Tootin, Mason, Monangai, Gainwell, and Hampton. And we could potentially start 2 of them there. And there's also a flex spot that could be in play. So I think the short answer here, the very quick one, is Hampton. We're going to play him. We're definitely gonna go with Hampton of that group, right? Of those secondary guys there. Like you said, we're taking the latter one from each thing. You got to go with Hampton there, because if it goes in the direction that I think it's going to go, like we mentioned, if he starts to get more work, I think he's the guy that you go with there. As far as the second player goes, it's Monangai in my mind, but I would listen to an argument for Gainwell, because Gainwell's been getting a ton of work. He's been really productive for fantasy 3 of the last 4 games. It's essentially like a 55-45 split in that backfield. He's found the end zone 3 times over the last month. Like, there's certainly value to him. Monangai, before last week's game, he had found the end zone 4 straight weeks. So there's value in a bunch of these guys, but I think those 3 definitely stand out, because Bashal Tootin, he got a little dinged up last week, but he also had some ball security issues. So just looking at him as more of like that one injury away guy. I don't really think he has the flex value that maybe he had earlier in the season a month ago or so. And then Jordan Mason is a total touchdown or bust type. He doesn't get involved in the passing game whatsoever. So I don't really feel great about his outlook here. But those other 3, I could certainly see coming through for fantasy. And it's interesting because there's a bunch of backfields that we could talk about like this, right? Like these committees where the second back in the backfield has some value. You could also look at the Panthers, who you mentioned earlier. Chuba Hubbard, definitely in that conversation. Blake Corum for the Rams. David Montgomery, long time has been in this conversation, and yet he's weirdly one that's kind of taken maybe a bit of a step back in terms of his fantasy value lately. And then the Seahawks backfield, that is just the most frustrating thing ever. But Zach Charbonnet, always kind of in that touchdown or bust mix too.
Oh man, I have a disturbing amount of my playoff teams that have Zach Charbonnet on it. And I think I said this a lot, especially when you and Scott were debating Kenneth Walker or Zach Charbonnet in Vegas. I kept saying I'm kind of a centrist on this issue. Don't ding him down the projections as we're talking about him. I hate when this happens when we put the guy on YouTube. He's like, I was like, oh yeah, I've got him in a lot of playoff matchups. Let's dock him a yard or 2 here. Come on, Zach Charbonnet. We need a big performance. We need a cheap touchdown for me in this one. Yeah, I ended up drafting a lot of him just because he ended up going later, and he's been a guy that God, I guess I'm putting him in this week, and I got some tough situations where I might be putting Zach Charbonnet in my lineup. So I'm hoping that this one can get a little out of hand against 44-year-old Phillip Rivers, and Zach Charbonnet is helping kill some clock in the second half of that Seahawks game. I think both those backs are live this week. But yeah, specifically on some of Joe's guys here. By the way, shout out to Joe. He is a complete zero RB sicko. Clearly, he's got so many of these secondary backs in the backfield. So shout out to you for grinding all year long. But yeah, Hampton is easily the one here that I think is the highest ranked, and I probably would go with Kyle Monangai as well. It's a little close with Kenny Gainwell, but it's a little cutesy as well. I will just note, Nate pointed this out on Football 301. Kenneth Gainwell on a per target basis is getting the rock, or excuse me, on a per route basis, he's getting the rock at like one of the highest rates in the league in the passing game from a running back standpoint. So PPR league, that actually might push me here into the Kenneth Gainwell discussion now that I'm talking myself through it. He's being targeted on like 27% of his routes, which on a per route basis is higher than DK Metcalf. That's how just weird that Steelers offense is right now. So I think actually thinking it out now, I might actually go Hampton and Gainwell. Plus then you get the Monday Night Hammer. So there is that.
Or the Monday Night Hope, sometimes it feels like, right? At least extends your
Monday Night
chances of
Cope, if it's
potentially
the
winning. It's
Steelers.
not always the hammer, but it definitely gives you another 24
Yeah.
hours of thinking you have a chance to win the matchup. If Gainwell only gives me 40
what could
points
possibly
tonight,
be more miserable than on a Monday Night Football game sweating out the second back in Arthur Smith, Aaron Rodgers offense, and you're only doing it to like, oh my God, I hope he catches 5 passes for 40 yards. What could possibly be more miserable than that?
and it's made fantasy, I guess some people could say, more fun because you have all these other backs that you could use and slot into your lineup as these options, which, several years ago, we didn't have this many number 2 backs that were producing at a level that you could put them in your lineup. I will say, from my perspective, the projections and the rankings, it makes it much harder to try to figure all this out. And I said that a couple years ago. I said this was one of the things I was worried about, that because the season was getting longer and it's probably soon going to get even longer, that they are going to start to get these other backs involved to try to keep guys healthy. And yeah, it's gotten to a point now where we just have so many of these guys that are in the RB3 flex range that any given week could pop up and produce here. And it's fun. It's fun. It's good. I'm looking at it from a positive perspective. It's great that we can grab these guys and play them. And, that we have all these guys now vulturing touchdowns from our star running backs. It's fantastic, Harmon.
Oh, it's just so much fun. Totally. Yeah, no, I do think it is interesting that some of these RB2s, like we've run through all these guys, they're viable to some degree here, which I think is a nice takeaway for those of us who are desperate at running back in week 15. Okay, let's get to the last question here of the week. This one's really fascinating, so I can't wait to break this one down.
All right. So at JRiv, who else would you start, Michael Wilson or Juwan Jennings, latecomer types over? You the best, Boone. Congrats on the new home at Yahoo. So thank you very much for that. And as we always joke, when you throw in a nice compliment like that, it gives you a little better chance to potentially get picked for the show. So very, very nice that you said that. This is one, Harmon, that I'm really hoping you can provide some insight on, because for Wilson, we know he's been incredible when Marvin Harrison Jr. has been out here, 118 yards or more in all 3 of these games. Harrison Jr. missing practice so far this week. He's kind of trending in the direction of potentially not playing. We'll keep an eye on that one, though. But this week, the Cardinals get a challenge unlike any other, right? This Texans defense is playing at such an elite level right now. 3rd fewest fantasy points allowed to wide receivers on the year, but it's been even worse lately. In their last 7 games, only 2 wide receivers have topped 55 yards against them, and only 1 wide receiver has caught more than 5 passes against them during that span. So these last 7 games have been something else. I want to keep Wilson ranked really high. That Jacoby Brissett is going to pepper him, that he's going to give him opportunities to win still. But I feel the need to bump him down into the wide receiver 2 range, because it's just hard for me to see him coming through with another one of these monster games. And yet I want to believe, and perhaps I want to believe because I have him on a bunch of teams, Harmon, and I'm really hoping that he can come through in the fantasy playoffs like he has in these other games when Marvin Harrison Jr. has been out.
I will say one of my teams that I have Michael Wilson, I've got a bye on, so I can wait till next week and feel pretty good about that. But yes, the Woody Marks team I mentioned earlier, where he needs to ice up and get out there, I also need Michael Wilson to get open against some Texans cornerbacks for that particular team as well. So I'm invested in this one. I will say for me, I've still got him ranked in that wide receiver 2 zone. I got him at wide receiver 13, which is certainly lower than where he's been previously, but I do just kind of think, Boone, this fantasy scam that they're running in Arizona right now is too big to fail. I mean, Jacoby Brissett, 50 freaking dropbacks last week, and he has kept that pace pretty much throughout. Like, pass rate over expected, neutral pass rate, they're top 3, if not first in the league since Jacoby Brissett has taken over. They're just dropping back and dropping back and dropping back. And that being said, obviously they're going to drop back a lot, and I think Jacoby Brissett is going to take 5+ sacks in this game. Paris Johnson Jr., the left tackle, has an MCL injury. That is certainly not going to help here. So I think Michael Wilson's odds to score a touchdown are pretty low, but he's still going to probably get double-digit targets in this game. I mean, off the bus, he's going to end up getting, because this team will still look to take away Trey McBride. It's more difficult, obviously, to bracket cover or double cover or shade something towards a tight end. 100%, that's more difficult. But still, Michael Wilson is probably going to be left in single coverage at times. And, Kamari Lassiter, the second cornerback for the Houston Texans, really good player, but he can be a gambler sometimes that you can kind of get. So I still think Wilson is a fantasy starter, but I'm not expecting one of these monstrous performances from him if that kind of gives the range of outcomes here.
Well, I totally hedged my bet in the rankings because I have him at wide receiver 13, which isn't a wide receiver 1,
dude,
but
that's where I have
as close as you could possibly get.
That's where I
it's
have
the highest wide receiver 2. So yeah, he's right in that range.
Right.
And I could see, over the next few days as I'm working on it, he could move a couple spots up, a couple spots down, but I don't see him falling any further than, mid-range wide receiver 2. So you're going to be playing him over most guys, and you're just going to have to hope that he can come through for you. For Jennings, I have him down in the low end wide receiver 2 range, but I've talked about how I think he could be really good. And we discussed the 49ers offense earlier. You mentioned Ricky Pearsall. I talked about Brock Purdy. We talked about the schedule and how good it is. And we've seen Jennings be pretty consistent lately. Like, he's not having these monster games, but 4 for 41 and a touchdown, 6 for 71 and a touchdown, 4 for 54 was kind of his only semi-bad week recently, 5 for 41 and a touchdown, and 4 for 31 and a touchdown over his last 5 outings. And yes, the touchdowns are doing a decent amount of the lifting in terms of propping up his fantasy value there, but he was also doing that in tougher matchups. And now, like we said, the schedule is going to get very, very easy for them, starting with the Titans this week. They're inside the top 10 for fantasy points allowed to wide receivers. So Jennings, another one of these guys, sort of like how we mentioned with Jaden Reed earlier, we've seen him get hot for short stretches and really show us a ceiling. I wonder, with these matchups, could this be another one of those spots where he comes on at the most important time in the fantasy calendar? So I quite like him as that like fringe low end wide receiver 2, maybe at worst high end wide receiver 3, but a guy who has a bunch of upside based on the scoring that we've seen from him.
Can't forget too, he's still playing him for a contract. He's still trying to get that deal for next year. He's a free agent going. So obviously he wants to have some big performances towards the end of the season here. Yeah. I mean, I'm looking at him around guys like Ladd McConkey, Steph Diggs, Zay Flowers. I'm not really sure that any of those guys profile better this week than a guy like Juwan Jennings. I mean, obviously you can chase, I think, higher ceilings with guys like McConkey, and probably Diggs too. It's just so difficult to pick the Diggs week. It's difficult to peg when he's going to have that 80% to even 75% route participation. You'd imagine it would be this game, right? Big divisional game. If the Patriots win this week, it's over. They're winning the AFC East. It's pretty much, it's not completely over, but they have a huge advantage right now as it is, but they pretty much lock it up if they can win this game. So you'd imagine that Diggs should be out there, obviously playing a ton. He had a season high 146 yards against this team last time they played. But yeah, I mean, that's sort of the range I'm thinking about for Juwan Jennings. And I just wonder, again, like, is it going to be just Juwan Jennings out targeting Ricky Pearsall forever? That's how it's been when the two guys have been healthy this year, but that sample size is really small. And how healthy was Ricky Pearsall really before the bye? So definitely a story to watch here. I actually kind of wanted to nominate one name for this discussion too here, because I think he fits into this bucket of one of these like latecomers. What do we feel about Christian Watson this week? Again, he's sort of similar in the bucket of a guy like Michael Wilson, where he has been red hot lately. I've said he has been playing the best football of his career without a doubt. He's particularly been good, Boone. Not certainly charting wise. Like, I wrote him up for reception perception this week as being a big performer against man coverage, which hasn't always been the case for him. But even from a production standpoint, since he returned in week 8, Christian Watson ranks 12th among all wide receivers in yards per route run against man coverage, 4 touchdowns against man coverage. Obviously, the Broncos play a bunch of man coverage, but not all man coverage is created equal. He's probably going to get the Patrick Surtain treatment this week, which is why I talked about Jaden Reed earlier. So where are we ranking Christian Watson, a guy that he has certainly been super, super helpful to teams off the waiver wire this year?
Yeah, it's really interesting to bring him up. I think it's a great name to mention here because he's kind of going from near one player that we just talked about to near the other. I would normally, in a better matchup, have him a lot closer to Michael Wilson as like the top 15 potential receiver based on the production that we've seen, how he's kind of, he's kind of answered this problem that we had with the Packers receiving core, where it's like they don't have that true number one. And he's another player where we've seen him have hot stretches before. We know the touchdown scoring that he brings. he's about as hot as anybody is in the league right now. And I wish that I could rank him in the top 15, but because of this matchup, I have a pretty serious dock on him because of the opponent. So I have him down at wide receiver 22. And yeah, right in that range where Juwan Jennings is. It's a hard spot. Like, it's a very hard spot to trust him in here, but he's also somebody that could easily find the end zone once and kind of cover up a lot of the problems that they might have. So where do you have him? Where are you thinking about him this week?
Yeah, I've got him same range. Those guys I was talking about, Diggs, McConkey, Watson, Juwan Jennings, Zay Flowers. I think he definitely has, like, he needs one play, right, to make like one deep post, one zone coverage look where Surtain's not traveling with him. He can make his day on that one catch. I mean, we saw, obviously, it wasn't just the one catch against the Bears, but that one post route where he lines up in the slot and it's just a single cover look there. He makes a great catch. He gets in the end zone. That would have made his day all on its own. Obviously, he had several other plays beyond that. So that's why he's a tough guy to completely get away from. But just to put it to like brass tacks here, I agree with you. Usually, I would have him ahead of guys like Devontae Smith and Justin Jefferson with how he's been playing right now. But because of the matchups that those guys are in, and oh my God, Justin Jefferson is just so depressing to talk about him in this way, but what are you going to do? I would probably play those guys ahead of a guy like Christian Watson this week, where normally I would go with current trend of play production as opposed to the name. I think I'd be okay in the matchups that those guys are in, maybe sitting Christian Watson in favor of those guys, but not for just like any old wide receiver 3.
Yeah, like the range that I have him in right now, there's guys like Wan'Dale Robinson, where I feel very comfortable having him ahead of Wan'Dale. I have Zay Flowers above him by one spot right now. I actually think I might move Watson above Zay Flowers because, yeah, he hasn't done the greatest recently and, didn't come through in that matchup a couple of weeks ago. And then you get into some of the names you're mentioning, like Devonta Smith and Ladd McConkey, who's got a bit of a tough matchup there. Don't know if I would go much higher than that, but yeah, I think Watson could potentially still sneak into the top 20. But I don't know that I can move him much higher than that. And I do think it's important. Like, sometimes we overestimate the receiver cornerback matchups a little too much because I think you might have touched on it there. The idea that, like, it's not, very rarely is it 100% of the snaps they're going to get an opportunity where they can break free, where they're going to line up against someone else, where they're going to get a manufactured touch that they can do something with. So you don't necessarily always have to just put these guys on your bench when they're in these really tough matchups. But like I said, for me, I just put like a pretty serious dock on the player. And in this case, we're looking at a, 7 to 10 spot dock where he would normally be in the rankings.
Yeah, and look, sometimes the wide receiver can just win those matchups. Look at Terry McLaurin, who got shadowed by Patrick Surtain a few weeks ago, and he came out as the winner of that matchup. Obviously, Surtain was coming off injury, but so was Terry McLaurin. So sometimes the wide receiver can just win and make it happen there. Yeah, I think that's a good discussion on Watson because he's somebody who I certainly had questions about. I think a lot of people have questions about what to do with him in this matchup. And if Watson's not going to do it, that again just brings us back to Jaden Reed or the running game or something there, because somebody's going to score points, even if it is that tough Broncos defense. All right, let's get to
it depends on who you have. It depends on who you have, obviously, always when it comes to lineup decisions, to bring it back to that question. But I would start all three of those guys in terms of like feeling okay, being willing to put them in my lineup. If, it was close with other players, I would be willing to start all of them. It's not an automatic like must sit situation.
Yeah, that's always the thing to me. It's like, okay, you want to bench these guys? Who are you going to bench them for? Somebody off the waiver. You going to play Adonai Mitchell with Brady Cook under center? I don't think so. Sorry to be, personal attack on you there, but yeah, I mean, oh my God, Brady Cook.
Just one of my greatest calls. Yeah. Oh, yeah. Did we say I'm the most accurate ranker this year? Really? Thanks, AD Mitchell. Really appreciate that, man. My lead would probably be bigger if it wasn't for you, dude.
I think Fantasy Pros should give you a Brady Cook pass on that one. Okay, we all get it. We all get a pass. Like Tyrod Taylor getting hurt 3 seconds into that game. Come on, let's be serious. We can all get a pass on the AD Mitchell call from last week.
I texted you a good chunk through that game mentioning, how Mitchell was doing. And that's exactly what you said to me to try to make me feel better, that the Brady Cook scenario kind of, made it just total mute points. So, all right, fine. But no, it was a bad call still. It was a bad call. Mitchell did not come through the way he did the week before, regardless of who was at quarterback. But looks like it could be Cook again this week. So yeah, we're not looking to put Mitchell in our lineups in the fantasy playoffs now. Nope. Not going to have that strong finish to the season that we were hoping for.
Nope. And they would make a perfect candidate for our next segment, but unfortunately they're playing the Jacksonville Jaguars, so we can't put that in literally no one's games of the week, but we will talk about those 3 contests right after this break. We'll get into this right after that. All right, we're back, and it's time to get into literally no one's games of the week. Oh man, that always makes me want to just take a little snooze, especially today. I'm running on fumes here, and that one was definitely let's just relax here. Let's just take it easy.
Well, these games are not going to help wake you up, but let's do our best.
No, Boone, please. That's the whole point of this segment. These are the lovable little freak shows where we might be able to extract some sneaky fantasy value for the people in their playoff matchups, starting with Browns at Bears. I guess it's a little hypocritical of me to say that, yeah, your face already says it all about how exciting this is. I guess it might be a little hypocritical of me to say in the tease for this segment that, well, we can't include the Jets here because the Jags are a playoff team, because the Bears are a playoff team. But I think actually because this game can be so sloppy in the cold and the Browns defense of it all, I actually kind of want to start here with your level of concern for some of the Bears players in this game, Boone. Again, it should be particularly cold. I've seen like -20 forecast potentially for this one. Not that cold is the biggest deal. Usually it's the wind, but still, nevertheless, what is our level of concern for some of these Bears players going against Myles Garrett and the boys on the other side in a bad weather game?
We've seen some people run on the Browns lately, and that wouldn't have been something that you would have thought would have happened a few weeks back. So if this does turn into more of a ground game with the conditions, with the wind, that sort of thing, the Bears are more than equipped to do fine in this one. So I have them a little bit lower. Like there's been weeks where I've had Swift inside the top 20 and I've had Monungai inside the top 24 in the same week. This week I have them down a little bit further. Swift's around RB 26, I believe, and Monungai, as we mentioned earlier, is RB 31. You can definitely play them both, but I think the ceiling is still, I'm going to believe that this Browns defense is still going to step up, and I think the ceiling's a little bit lower than it would be most weeks. Other than that, like, yeah, what are we that excited about? Like, Luther Burden, I liked what I saw last week. He didn't necessarily get the bump in playing time that I'd hoped for. Led the team in most receiving categories, and I think there could be bigger days ahead. But with this environment, do we really think that in this weather conditions we're going to see him come through with a big spike week here? I don't know about that. Colston Loveland's kind of in the same boat where the talent is definitely
Mhm.
there, but is he going to get enough volume to come through for fantasy? Unless, of course, any one of these guys scores a touchdown. So, yeah, we're bumping the Bears down a little bit more based on the defense that they're going against and based on the weather.
Not to mention, Roman Dunes have been limited in practice the last 2 days. I still think it would be kind of crazy if he has a stress fracture in his foot if he's out there playing this week, but it's at least possible because he's not participating. If he was not participating in practice, that'd be another discussion. But him being limited, I think then obviously that would really muddy up the target picture once again. You could clearly feel they missed him in this last week's game, but it's not as if, again, like you said, Luther Burden didn't get the bump in playing time. I still maintain, don't be annoyed if he doesn't produce down the stretch. He will be a really strong 2026 breakout candidate. Same with Colston Loveland. Honestly, same with this whole Bears offense, but I'm with you that my expectations are lowered this week. On the Browns side of things, obviously Shedeur Sanders, pretty dynamic game last week. Really good throwing the football down the field, I thought. And Harold Fannin was his guy, man. And Harold Fannin, I don't care what the weather looks like in this game. Maybe we finally get him over 50% rostered so we could stop talking about him in the waiver wire. But my God, man, I mean, Harold Fannin to me, I think is what, like a top 8 tight end on the week, bare minimum. I'm very excited about Harold Fannin in this one.
In my early runs of the rankings, I have him as a top 5 tight end this week. And we'll see how that shakes out when we figure out exactly what the weather looks like. Because normally I don't factor in the weather too much early in the week. I do that after Thursday when we get closer to the actual game day and you get a little bit better read on the weather. Often people like overreact to things that might happen. And then by the time you get to Sunday, it's nowhere near what the forecast was earlier in the week. But this one does look like it's going to be cold, and some of these things that we mentioned seem like they're going to materialize. And yet still, like, Fannin is a weapon, right? Like, he's not like some guy that you necessarily need to find downfield. He can get short passes. He can break tackles. He has been outstanding this year. And you mentioned it, like the volume, 11 targets last week, like just last week, 11 targets in this offense, and Njoku getting banged up and not practicing. We'll see if he's able to play this week. But yeah, not just do we need to see him, getting picked up in all fantasy leagues, but we need to see him continuing to get full-time snaps and continuing to be the de facto number 1 receiver in this offense, which is what he's already emerged as. Really, really excited about his potential, not just this week, but the rest of the season. I think he's a top 10 tight end and potentially even a guy who could sneak into the top 5 over these next 3 weeks.
63% rostered, it looks like, finally. So we finally won't talk about Harold Fannin on a waiver wire.
We did it.
So there we go. Okay, next game here. Commanders at Giants. We talked a lot about the Commanders side here. I don't know if we need to get more into that one, but I do want to discuss the Giants here a little bit because I have put this kind of out there, and you and I have maybe discussed this a little bit too. I am a little concerned about Jackson Dart as a fantasy quarterback if they're not going to use him as a designed rusher. We saw the game before the bye. They completely eliminated that from the offense. He did scramble. We know he's going to scramble. We know he's going to get himself obliterated out there as a scrambler, but nevertheless, it is his play style. He will do that. I think Boone, if he's going to maintain QB1 status in fantasy, he's going to have to step it up as a passer. The good news is, I think he can step it up as a passer in this particular matchup against the Washington Commanders. Not only is the Commanders defense a complete mess over there, they also play, they give up the most points per dropback since week 8 in single high coverage, and Dart has been much more efficient, which makes sense. You think about Dart as a prospect, he wants to work outside the numbers, push the ball vertically. I think him and Wan'Dale Robinson, who has been running more outside downfield routes this year, as we talked about when we did that film breakdown, I think before the Thanksgiving holiday, he's been running those routes. Like, I think those two guys can connect really well in this game.
Yeah, I mentioned it earlier, but I think this game has like sneaky shootout potential. The projected point total is nice. It's not crazy. It's not 55.5 or whatever the Rams Lions game is, but it's a nice 47.5. And I think we could see a lot more. I'm very interested in this game. I think there's a lot of fantasy assets like we talked about on the Commander side, but also on the Giants side in terms of the backs and the receivers like Wan'Dale Robinson and even Darius Slayton. Like, there's guys that can get through. Theo Johnson, if he's healthy for this one. There's some interesting pieces that aren't like guys that you might have thought you would have had in your lineup in the fantasy playoffs. But if you have that hole in the flex spot, wide receiver 3 type thing, you could slot some of these guys in a game that the weather's also going to be potentially a bit of a problem here, like around freezing, 10 to 15 mile an hour winds. So we'll have to keep an eye on that for a bunch of these. There's probably like 8, 9, 10 games this week that we're going to have to keep an eye on the weather for. But I think this one could potentially shoot out and could lead to some good fantasy production.
Can confirm it is cold here on the East Coast. So yeah, I can confirm Boone's reporting on that one. I can already see the Darius Slayton crushing drop as he's streaking down the field on a perfect placed pass from Jackson Dart against this Commanders secondary. That is unfortunate. Just back here on the Commanders side real quick, Zach Ertz obviously out. Do you have hope for any of like the deeper tight end names there? Deebo Samuel potentially stepping up in the middle of the field, anything like that with Zach Ertz now out for the season?
Yeah, I think it'll just end up going to the receivers and to the backs. I don't know that any of I think it's going to be a split between John Bates and we'll see Ben Sinnott. And I don't really have faith that either of those guys are going to step up and put up big numbers, not that Ertz was putting up like monster stats, but he was putting up 40, 50 yards. He was finding the end zone at a decent clip. I just don't think anybody else on this team is going to step up like that at the tight end position. So I'm boosting the other guys in the offense up a little bit, not necessarily the tight end spot.
Yeah, that makes complete sense. Okay, next game up, our last one of this segment, Dolphins at Steelers, which is somehow a Monday night football game. I am already so just dreading the solo Monday night recap I have to do for this one. Oh my God, what am I going to say about Dolphins Steelers? Somehow it is a Monday night football game, and yet it is also a no one's game of the week, despite the fact that one of these teams is in the division lead right now in terms of the Pittsburgh Steelers, and the Dolphins are fighting. The Dolphins have the same record as the Kansas City Chiefs. And I will say, Boone, speaking of the Dolphins, I think they're in a pretty good spot against this Steelers defense. Now, Tua in the cold weather, out here on the East Coast, that makes me a little nervous. But like Devon Achane, how many times can he touch the ball in this one? Can we get some easy button stuff to Jalen Waddle? Theoretically, it looks like a type of defense that this offense should be good against.
Yeah, I was looking at the Steelers defense as a potential play this week in fantasy, and yet now today we had the TJ Watt. Because it's exactly what you just said, right? To a cold weather, I thought maybe they could get through, but now we had the TJ Watt situation today where he's in the hospital with this lung issue. We're going to have to see how that plays out. And based on what we're seeing right now, I think we have to consider him potentially doubtful for that Monday night game. We don't know the severity of the injury yet or exactly what happened, but without him, you take away their best player, and now that defense doesn't look as exciting. And this one is going to be another one. We keep saying it, but this is going to be potentially even colder than all these other ones, right? Temperatures around 20 degrees. The winds are going to be fairly light. There's a chance of precipitation. So this is one we're going to have to pay close attention to and could get sloppy very quickly if it's cold and if it's rainy or snowy or anything there. And yeah, Devon Achane, I really hope he's healthy, because to do what he did all season long, and I mentioned him as a guy last week that I thought he could finish, over the last few weeks here as the RB1 overall. He has been fantastic this season, and I don't think he gets enough praise for that. I don't think he gets mentioned in the same breath as CMC and Bijan Robinson and Jahmyr Gibbs enough, and he definitely belongs there with them, especially to do it on this team, the way the Dolphins were playing earlier in the year. And yet, yeah, if he isn't out there, I think he is going to be, but if he isn't out there, that would only make this game even uglier.
Yeah, Jalen Wright exploding last week. I think that might have something more to do with the Jets defense than Jalen Wright. Although I will say that Dolphins offensive line, especially the left side, is playing a lot better. Patrick Paul looks good. Aaron Brewer's having a great season at center. So they're definitely a unit to watch next year, where they could certainly be an improved team overall if they keep McDaniel, which I think at this point they probably are trending towards. Let's talk about the Steelers here real quick. I mentioned Kenny Gainwell's getting a lot of targets per route run. Looked it up here. These are the running backs that are being targeted at the highest rate among running backs who have run 150 plus routes on the season. Number one is Christian McCaffrey. 27% of his routes he gets a target. That makes sense. Number two is Kenny Gainwell at 26.9%. Then you've got Jahmyr Gibbs. You got Devon Achane. You've got RJ Harvey. Those guys are all kind of hovering around like 26 to 24%. Cam Scatterbo, remember him? Well, he's at 130 routes, so we'll throw him out. He doesn't count. Chase Brown, 22%. Tajay Spears, 22%. Bijan Robinson, 22%. Jalen Warren at 21.7%. So the Steelers have two running backs inside the top 10 most frequently targeted running backs on a per route basis. This is an abominable offense. It's like they don't push the ball downfield at all. And when they do, I think that the go routes to DK Metcalf look pretty cool. They just never pull the trigger on those plays, Boone.
Yeah, and which DK Metcalf are we getting this week? Are we getting the DK Metcalf
Great question.
that is not great for fantasy, or the one that just pops off once every month and goes off for 100 yards and a touchdown? Like, that's another one to try to project here. But I really think the running back thing is just an Aaron Rodgers stat at this point. Like, I just think he's not that interested in throwing the ball downfield until he has to at the end of a game or at the end of a half, and he's still got the arm to do it. But totally. Yeah, he's just playing that dink and dunk game, and yet somehow people think that Phillip Rivers is going to come out and be fantastic. An even older quarterback. I don't know about that, but yeah, I Rodgers in the cold. It's not looking good, I don't think, for fantasy.
I think actually that's a good way to end this segment here. I haven't heard your Phillip Rivers take. Like, what do you think? It's honestly sounds like today from the reports from Stephen Holder, who's covered the team forever. He works for ESPN. He's covered the team forever. He's saying it doesn't take too much to see in practice who is being prepared to start. And this team is preparing to start Phillip Rivers on Sunday. So I'm expecting 44-year-old Phillip Rivers starting a game. Boone, what's your take on that?
My take is that I hope he's not taken off the field in a body bag. I think he could probably come out and, put it together for, a game or two. I think he's probably got enough. And yet the matchup is against the Seahawks defense. He is not getting a soft landing here coming back. He is getting one of the toughest defenses in the league. He's not going to be able to move back there. He can't scramble. He's not going to be able to evade anyone. He is going to get hit often. I'm worried, Harmon. I am very worried that he's not even going to finish this game.
I'll say this on air. I'll say this on air because it was mentioned at the press conference. I was saying to our producers, maybe edit what I said. I was like, Phillip's looking a little husky up there at the podium.
Well, he acknowledged it, I think, though.
Well, that's why I'm comfortable saying it because he acknowledged it. One of the reporters asked him what his playing weight was. And he said, "It's not what it was when I walked off the field on Buffalo." He said, "But don't worry, I never ran away from anybody, anyways." I'm like, and Colin said, "Hey, why are you judging him?" I'm like, "I'm not judging him. He's been retired for 5 years. Of course, he doesn't look like he's in shape to play a football game because he's been retired for 5 years. What are we talking about, bro? It's one of the most insane stories I can ever remember." I'm fascinated to watch it, but I don't have any idea what it is going to look like besides the fact Phillip Rivers probably can he can diagnose Mike McDonald's scheme, and I'm sure the coverage recognition, it's still right on the back of his hand. He knows this offense back to front, the whole deal. But that's just totally different than going out there and there's going to be live, game reps, pass rushers coming at you. So I just have no idea what to expect.
I don't know how you can't be concerned, and yet at the same time, I'm rooting for him. I would love to see him do this.
Same.
Harmon, this is not to date myself here, but this might be the last time that there's a player in the NFL that's older than me, right? I turned 43 at the start of December here, so this might be the final time that there is a player in the NFL older than me, so let's enjoy it, and let's hope he does well.
Let's hope. Time just keeps on moving, pal. But yeah, I'm with you. I have no idea what to expect. I don't have a hot take on Phillip Rivers. I'm going to watch it, and I'm going to be open-minded to the experience, and we shall see what happens. Just an absolutely outrageous story. Okay, with that, we are going to take our final break. When we come back, we're going to get into the hurry-up offense. We'll get into that right after this. All right, we're back. It's time for the segment that's sweeping the nation. It's the Hurry Up Offense. This is where we put 40 seconds on the clock. We ask each other rapid fire questions. Let's get into it. Let's start the Hurry Up Offense. All right, Boone, you kick us off as always.
I promise everyone at home, Harmon had no idea this was the question I was going to ask, and we ended the last segment talking about Phillip Rivers. This one is a Phillip Rivers question. Which recently retired quarterback, and recently has been, in the last 5 years or so, which recently retired quarterback would you choose to start one NFL game at their current age? So we have Phillip Rivers, 44, Eli Manning, 44, Drew Brees, 46, Tom Brady, 48, or I will include Peyton Manning at 49. Which of those guys would you start in a must-win scenario?
Oh, my God. Well, it's definitely not Peyton Manning. His arm was shot back in 10 years ago. That's not even recent. That's the thing. He retired after the 2015 season. I think the easy answer is Brady. I am 99%. Did you watch the last Spider-Man movie where the Green Goblin mask is talking to Willem Dafoe?
Yeah.
That is definitely Tom Brady's helmet is talking to him right now. He sees Rivers out there. Come on, man. Brady, the Raiders need you. They're going to start Kenny Pickett this weekend. Get out of the owner's box and get out there on the field. I think Brady could definitely do it. Also, Cam Newton is a sneaky answer for this one, too, only to get by as a runner. He's another answer.
Little younger, though. We're not counting. A little younger. We went 44 and up.
You said recently retired. You said nothing about 44 and up. Please, come on. Anyways. All right. First question to you. If you could trade one wide receiver to your Bills for the stretch run, who would it be? And you have to make it somewhat realistic, okay? Jamar Chase can't just come and hang out for the next couple of weeks here. So somewhat realistic here trade option for the Bills.
I mean, can I go get Michael Wilson? Michael Wilson looks like he could be a number one receiver.
Wilson.
Why don't we go get?
So
you want to talk
random.
about realistic? I don't even need to go get a superstar. This guy has looked like a superstar. I would love to see that, but you know what the real answer is, and I don't think it's going to happen because he's in division, and I don't think they would ever trade him to Buffalo, and I don't know if he'll leave New York. But Garrett Wilson, man, let's get Garrett Wilson out of New York, whether it's Buffalo or somewhere else. Let's put him on a team where he can play with a decent quarterback. And let's see what this guy can do. And I'm not sure that he would ever be an elite receiver, but I think he could be a darn good one, man, if you could pair him with somebody that, is much better than what he's had to deal with in New York. There we go. Which player that you're starting on one of your teams this week scares you the most? This is the first round of the fantasy playoffs. Who are you starting this week where you were just man, I'm worried about putting that guy in my lineup?
Okay, well, we were talking about it during one of the breaks. I have a wide receiver room that consists of Marvin Harrison Jr., Drake London, Rome Odunze, Ricky Pearsall, Alec Pierce, Rashid Shaheed, and then I've got Cedric Tillman as my last guy on the bench. What is he even doing there? I'm going to have to start multiple of I have to start at least 3 of them, and any of them freak me out. London, people is not going to play on Thursday. Harrison, obviously, he's probably not going to play. Dunze, highly questionable. So, Ricky Pearsall is probably my best option, or it is Alec Pierce with, the ghost of Phillip Rivers out there. So, pick any of those names, but Pearsall, this is a good team. The running backs have to carry me, period, end of story.
Yeah.
Okay. Let's stick on that trend. Who is the most embarrassing player you're starting in a playoff matchup this weekend?
Oh, wow. I definitely have one deep dynasty league where I'm going to have to start Chris Rodriguez now that Josh Jacobs is out. So that one scares me quite a bit. I have one of those leagues. I'm going to have to pick from a really bad receiver group in one league because it's start 5 receivers. And I think I've mentioned this one before. It's so deep in dynasty and it's so thin that you end up having to go with these awful options Van Jeffersons of the world. So I was going to start Pat Bryant, and it doesn't look like he's going to play. So it's going to end up being Tim Patrick, I think, in that league probably is the one. And I love Tim Patrick, but in the year 2025, he is not the player that you want. Are we actually, this is more just me being shocked by this, but are we actually going to see an NFL postseason that doesn't have Patrick Mahomes, Lamar Jackson, or Joe Burrow? Or are one of these guys going to sneak their way into the fantasy or to the playoffs?
Well, the only one who I think could do it is Lamar, just because the Steelers are the Steelers. Burrow, it's over. Burrow's at the podium being like, if I can't have fun, what am I doing? Yeah, you're not having fun in the playoffs, I'll tell you that. Talking about friggin' Pokemon cards or whatever. So, yeah, Bengals are not making the playoffs. They're playing with Pokemon cards back at home. The Chiefs, I think it's over. So if somebody's going to do it, it's going to be Lamar. And you know what, Boone? I'm into it. Okay, I've been saying it on 301 every week when we talk about the playoff race. I'm into it, man. I'm like, variety is the spice of life. I want to see this happen.
As a Bills fan, I would like to see all three of them not make the playoffs, but we'll leave it at that.
I say, hey, I throw the flag here for just 1 second. I said this on 301. If I'm Josh Allen, I'm thinking, this is my year, baby. History will never remember the fact that Mahomes wasn't it. This is it. History has no context. All that matters is you get that ring, baby. Doesn't matter you didn't go through Kansas City. Nobody cares about that except dorks on Twitter. So please, they can win the Super Bowl this year. It will never matter. All right, final question. This one obviously comes from me here. Justin Boone, would you rather, speaking of Phillip Rivers and old 40-year-olds playing football, would you rather run 10 routes over the middle versus the Houston Texans defense or finish last in the rankings contest?
This one's easy. I would run the routes. I would take the beating. Even at my age, when I was a younger man, Harmon, I worked for a CFL team. I was a beat writer for a CFL team, the Hamilton Tiger Cats. And I pitched that as an article idea. Let me go out at practice. Let me suit up. I had played football. Let me suit up and get out there. And they would not allow me for, insurance reasons. They would not allow me to
say
take
so.
the field. And they were probably right about that. But yeah, you know how I feel about the contest. I'd be willing to take that beating in order to avoid last place. So that was an easy one for me.
This is so mean. This is so mean. Brian Thomas Jr., Justin Boone mashup here. So mean. I disavow this image, but nevertheless, I
you
think
did
that's,
say that you did say you think Brian Thomas Jr. is going to finish the season strong and have a couple big games, so I don't mind it. I'll take the Brian Thomas Jr. comparison.
Hey, he had 87 yards last week. I think you could have 0.87 yards against the Houston Texans defense. You'd be going 87 yards to the nearest hospital if you had to play against the Houston Texans defense. So at least you wouldn't finish last in the rankings contest. There's that. All right, Boone, hell of a show, buddy. Appreciate it. And good luck to you and everyone out there in your fantasy playoff matchups.
Same, dude. You too.
All right, that's going to do it for us today. Of course, for those of you busy in the YouTube chat, as I always say, if you have specific questions on this show, we can't get to them. But every Friday, John Daigle goes live for a Q&A on this very YouTube channel at 4 p.m. Eastern. He's here for you, answers all the questions. Make sure you check that show out. Meanwhile, Chris Allen and I will be back on Sunday. We're going to recap everything we've seen from Week 15. So when the Broncos and the Packers and the Lions and the Rams, those games hit 000, we will be right here. Join us live on YouTube. Like the channel, subscribe, do all those things, and we will see you right back here on Sunday. Until then, we are out.